subtitle to this one is How to Keep All of Your Fucks. In the past, I've talked about toggling between being my big self, my large self, my higher self maybe, and my temporal, urgent fellow self, the person who gives too many fucks. I've talked about how to stay on top, how to stay up in that higher place, and it's ethical. It's more ethical to be up there. It's less toxic to be up there in that place, to be in your strong place where you're mostly trying to please yourself. And that isn't selfish. We've talked about putting on the oxygen mask, and we've talked about making sure you can keep breathing so that you can help other people keep breathing. Because if you stop breathing, you won't be able to do that. So I think that pretty much, for me, is all the bliss, all the joy. It's figuring out how to stay up in that elevated place. And then everything looks the way it's supposed to look. It doesn't look more important than it's supposed to look. It doesn't feel like I should be urgent or anxious about anything. Avoiding anxiety comes down to that one thing. Staying in that bigger place, that elevated place. When I'm in that place, I can look around and I can think of the Earth as one of many planets in one of many galaxies.
In 1/4 mile, take the ramp on the right to US 30 East.
In one of many universes. Who knows? I feel as though there's a process, and I was trying to guess why it takes so many entities, so many personalities to make it work. You can go back and watch that one. I haven't edited everything, and I'm not editing in order, so I don't know when that one comes out. But I know that I've, to myself, recently
take the
talked
ramp
about...
on the right to US 30 East.
I know that to myself, I've recently talked about that idea of why there has to be so many freaking people. And I talked about the bell-shaped curve and all that. So I won't talk about that here, but I will say that I assume the universe knows what it's doing, and that it really has need of all of those people and animals and whatever else, an entity, whatever you think of as an entity, a personality. And we all interact with each other, and without coercion, without forcing or leverage, we can all become, of our own free will, we all...
Continue at US 30.
We can all become our highest self, if we choose. I mentioned earlier that Jesus said the path is narrow and straight is the gate that leads to life, and few there be that find it. And that's probably true, based on what I notice around me. And that's because no one has to do it. No one is coerced. And I talked about the idea of a curriculum as being a bad thing, because people are trying to jump through hoops to get to the place where they pass muster for someone else, in someone else's opinion. And that ain't it, kid. That ain't it, kid. We don't need that. We don't need to pass muster for anyone else, at least. We need to form our own values based on how we feel about things. So we have to give ourselves a chance to decide how that is. And we have to give ourselves a chance to decide for ourselves what that looks like. one thing that occurs to me is that I need to plug my energy leaks. I've talked before about my headache trick, where I can drain the pain of a headache before I even really feel it. And then I've talked about applying that trick to other things. And I think one way I apply it is if I'm around toxic people, their poison tries to come into me like a headache, but I drain the toxins before they can touch me. But I was thinking, when things get thick and fast and lots of people are trying to harm me, I feel like even though I'm quick, even though I can drain things quickly, it would be a lot less effort if I could shut off the valve at the top and keep the toxins out altogether. So how do I do that? And I think the answer is I figure out how not to care what they think. In other words, not to give a fuck. So I was going through a list of the kinds of categories of people that might inspire any of us to give a fuck. Any of us who are on a journey, on a quest to become non-toxic, need to learn how to not give a fuck. And that means how not to care what other people think about us. I was thinking about the research I've read on adolescents and how they have always this invisible audience. So great a cloud of witnesses, the Bible might say, all around us. If we're teenagers, we're imagining that we're being watched, that everyone notices all the stupid things we do, or what kind of clothing we're wearing, or what backpack our parents could afford to buy us. And I was thinking, what a great gift it would be to give all our teenagers the ability not to give a fuck about that invisible audience. Imagine how powerfully, with their shoulders back, they could walk around if they didn't have to think about that invisible audience and how to keep them from judging them harshly. And it isn't just teenagers who have an invisible audience. I think about how my fellow truck drivers are. They're always noticing what I'm wearing. They're always noticing how I do things. So we have invisible and visible audiences. And lots of us grown-ups care way too much about what the people around us think. A lot of the drama we bump into is because of that. So what a gift we can give ourselves if we can, at the top, close off how we feel about the way other people judge us. So I've thought about the energy draining out, the toxins draining out, but I could also have a valve at the top. And I think about the valve, it's a visual help. In my own mind, I picture twisting 3 or 4 times, whatever it takes, to get that valve all the way shut off. And I think about the people whose opinions I've valued in the past. And then I think to myself, I don't care what my parents think. I don't care what my dead relatives think, my dead grandparents and other ancestors. I don't care what pastors think. I don't care what God thinks. I don't care what my children think. I don't care what my students think. I don't care what my partner or partners think. I don't care if I have friends with benefits. I don't care what they think. I don't care what my coworkers think. I don't care what my employer thinks. If you go back to George Jensen and Fred Flintstone, we were taught by those shows, and Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie and other shows, we were taught to care too much. We were taught to give a fuck about what our boss thinks. we can be free and rise up as a people and overthrow the oppression that we're facing if we care too much about authority. I don't care what my government thinks. I don't care what big corporations think. Our owners, society's owners, I don't care what they think. I don't care what the CIA thinks. I don't care what the police thinks. Anyone else who has a big thumb of oppression over my head, I don't care what anybody thinks. And that's the key. That shuts off every valve. So as I become aware of myself caring about what other people think, I picture a valve in between them and me. Whether they're benign, whether they're malicious, it doesn't matter. Whether they like me or hate me, doesn't matter. Between me and them is a valve that I can close. And when it comes to caring what they think, more than caring what I think, I'm going to close that valve. Does that mean I won't heed good advice? No, it doesn't mean that. I will listen to everything. But will I care about how beautiful a woman is when I'm deciding whether or not to heed her advice? If you think about being non-toxic, one of the most toxic things men do is care too much about getting laid. And getting laid by someone they find valuable. And that opens up on another can of worms. When you're trying to please a potential mate, or a potential fuck buddy, or a potential business partner even, if you're trying to get something from them, even if it's just validation, you're going to care too much. And I shouldn't have said just validation, that's a big one. You're going to care too much about their opinion. You're going to give too many fucks about how they feel about you and about what you're doing. So employers too, you will care too much about how they feel about you. So if you are a typical male, let's say, and you care too much about what potential sexual or romantic people in your life think, you're going to jump through hoops for them more quickly than you'll jump through hoops for someone you find less valuable. Think about the social pecking order. You could line up any group of people from top to bottom based on whatever attributes you want: looks, personality, wealth, other measures of social status, whatever you want. You can line people up, and the more valuable they are socially, the more likely you are to want to suck up to them and care about what they think of you. And if you're interested in them sexually or romantically, it's worse, because we're hardwired to get our genes into the future. So we think about, whether it's subconsciously or consciously, we think about how our genes are going to mix with their genes and have the best chance to keep going, to keep marching into the future. So that is the way we've been for millions of years. It's not easy to just stop caring about that. But if we have that valve and we're turning it, it might take more effort and more turns for some valves than for others. If you are a male who cares too much about what potential romantic sexual partners think of you, you might have to really twist that little sucker to shut it all the way down. But if you succeed at that, and you keep it closed over time, if you stop giving a fuck about romantic partners and sexual partners and employers and everyone else, you're going to be less toxic. You're going to have a lot better shot at making ethical decisions if you're not worried about other people and their opinions. You're going to make the best decisions you can make based on your own ethical decisions, your own values. And that is fine if you haven't been raised the way I've been raised. Like when I said, I don't care what God thinks, somebody listening might have cringed. Oh no, you can't say that. You might get zapped by a bolt of lightning. I don't think that's an ethical way to come up with decisions. I don't think being afraid of God or anyone else is going to help you use your best judgment. And I think your best judgment is your best option, as opposed to trying to blindly follow some authority. If you trust someone's advice and you follow it because it's good advice, as opposed to because they're in authority over you, or because you want to get laid by them or whatever, that you're going to make a better decision, a more ethical decision. Being leveraged or coerced, even if it's by your own admiration for someone, that's not the best way to do things. To keep a level head, you need to not think with your gonads or your potential earnings. Your greed doesn't make the best decisions either, whether it's sexual greed or for monetary gain or for status or whatever else you want. So that valve twisting trick is a big deal for me anyway. I think I can make a lot of use of that. I think I can use that in conjunction with the draining headache trick to keep myself in that elevated place where I can make the best decisions and feel the least amount of anxiety. In analyzing the sources of my anxiety, it almost always comes from giving too many fucks and from giving those fucks about the wrong people's opinions. And for giving too many fucks about the right people's opinions for the wrong reasons. I don't want to make ethical decisions based on what it means to the people from whom I want something. That's just not the best way to make a decision. When dealing with my own anxiety, one of the biggest sources of fear is losing something I value. And if it's a relationship with a person whom I value, I think I first need to figure out why do I value that person. And if it's for good reasons, then I need to think about what do I do if I lose that person in my life? What do I do if I lose that person's approval or acceptance or validation, which is like heroin to some people? If somebody else, even in good faith, is supplying me with something I need, I probably need to examine that relationship and figure out how to get what I need without that relationship. And if that relationship continues, it'll probably be on a much healthier basis if I don't need it. If I'm not a junkie looking for other people to supply my needs. One of the problems I have with love languages, with all the talk about different kinds of love languages, is that people are saying what I need from other people. What I need from other people is fill in the blank. And the problem with attachment styles is the same. What I need from the people I'm attached to is fill in the blank. I need something from them. I'm attached to them. I'm attached to the idea that they will provide something for me that I need. And I don't see that as healthy. This kind of thinking strikes at the very heart of how we think about romance, especially in the West. Think about all the Disney films we've watched, and think about how love works, how relationships work in those stories, in those archetypes. We look at Prince Charming We look at Cinderella and we think how happily we're going to live our lives together because now we've found our person, we've found our other half, we've found what we're looking for. Whether it's a raise at work or whether it's some achievement that has nothing to do with romance or with money even, we think we're going to be happier after we find this thing, this elusive thing. And that's not how the law of attraction works, for sure. We attract what we already are and what we already have. And it works that way with relationships. And we will be more ethical and less toxic if we figure that out.